Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the economic reports from around the world. Coming up, 2 years following the Marikana Massacre, South African miners still live in poverty, and Scottish voters prepare to vote for independence. First, the headlines. European stocks rallied after equities climbed the most in more than a month last week, boosted by prospects of a drop in tensions between Ukraine and Russia. The Stoxx Europe 600 index rallied 1.1% in early trade in London after advancing 1.5% last week. Tensions in Ukraine have been on the decline following talks in Berlin, though a Russian aid convoy at the border could easily set things off. And as Ukrainian forces fight off separatist rebels in Luhansk, Russia accuses Kiev of triggering a humanitarian crisis through disproportionate use of force. Large U.S. banks such as Bank of America, Citigroup, and Morgan Stanley are drawing up preliminary plans to move London-based activities to Ireland as the U.K. drifts away from the EU. The Wall Street banks are preparing for the Eurozone's impending banking union that threatens to isolate Britain and may lead to a possible U.K. exit or Brexit. Most U.S. and Asian banks base their European operations in the U.K., giving them an automatic passport to carry out their services across all 28 countries in the trade bloc. But the UK is unlikely to be granted the same passporting rights if it leaves the EU. Kurdish forces helped by U.S. strikes took control of most of Iraq's largest dam, previously conquered by the Islamic State militants. All futures declined after Islamic State gains were reversed. Brent crude for October settlement slid as much as $1.18 to $102.35 a barrel on the London-based ICE Futures Europe exchange. West Texas Intermediate crude for September delivery fell as much as 77 cents in electronic trading on the New York Mercantile Exchange. The dam is the most important asset the Islamic State captured since taking Nineveh province in June. ISIS controls several oil and gas fields in western Iraq and eastern Syria, generating millions of dollars in daily revenue to help fund the caliphate and strengthen its grip on territory. London home sellers cut asking prices by the most in more than 6 years, adding to signs the property market is cooling. London home values fell 5.9% from the previous month to an average $922,000, property website Rightmove said on Monday. Nationally, prices declined 2.9%, a record drop for August. Tougher new mortgage rules introduced by the Bank of England and anticipation of higher interest rates are weighing on the market. Israel will end its export of poultry and dairy products to the European Union from areas considered illegal by the trade bloc. Israel was asked to establish a system indicating where organic produce comes from to avoid all poultry and dairy products from being affected. The new directives issued by the European Commission in February are effective from September 1st. According to Israel's Ministry of Agriculture, Israeli export of products from the disputed territories is not significant and caters mainly to diaspora Jews who observe religious dietary laws. Despite various strikes and unrest in South Africa's mining industry that weighed on the country's economy, miners continue to live in poverty and living wages remain out of reach. Daniel Roth has the details.
Thousands of platinum miners gathered Saturday at Marikana for a memorial of the killing of 34 co-workers by police during a strike 2 years ago at the South African site. 46 were killed during those protests in total. The memorial took place on a hillside turned monument to the dead outside of the Lonmin mine, near where the shooting took place. The massacre was filmed and circulated around the world. The images and reports that many had been shot in the back were reminiscent of apartheid-era police killings. Though a memorial, overarching political economic issues were front and center.
The government of the ANC took away the breadwinners. A government that takes away the breadwinners. We want a government that will give us breadwinners and not take them away.
The striking workers had been demanding higher wages, and after a 22% pay hike and a small one-time payment, they did go back to work. The month-and-a-half-long strike cost $500 million in lost revenue to the industry. South African miners live in hard conditions and don't make what they call a living wage. Earlier this year, a 5-month-long strike took place in which miners demanded twice what they make, though they settled for up to 20% pay hike annually. This time, the strike cost $2.25 billion for the industry.
In terms of working, we are still working the same. In terms of living, he's living here in the shacks behind you. You see there, nothing changed. We are still in the poverty.
As long as living wages are out of reach, strikes and unrest in South Africa's mining industry will most likely be an ongoing reality. As the memory of the massacre lives on, a judicial probe is still underway.
Eric Lee, a trade unionist and the founding editor of Labor Start, an online news service for the trade union movement, joins us on Skype regarding labor issues in South Africa and beyond. Mr. Lee, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Why hasn't the miners' union in South Africa been more successful?
That's an odd way of putting it. The miners' union in South Africa was perhaps too successful.
Well, I mean, people still do not have a living wage, right? So how are they successful? In what sense?
Look, the miners' union was a big part of the struggle against apartheid. The National Union of Mine Workers played a central role in the fight to bring down apartheid. That was a fight that lasted for generations. So to have triumphed against apartheid, you can't say, well, they haven't achieved anything. And they've achieved something massive. What's happened is they've become a victim of their own success.
Okay, and how can you describe how? I mean, in what sense? What does this mean for the average miner in South Africa?
Well, look, first of all, miners have unions. I mean, under apartheid, miners did not have the right to strike or form unions, which they do have now. That's a significant change. And your report just reported that after two of these big strikes, workers won huge wage increases. So that's something that was unthinkable under apartheid. So these are massive wins. But they become too successful in the sense that, and I can say this to an Israeli audience in particular, in the same way the Histadrut at one time was seen as too powerful, too linked to the state, not representing its own workers, representing larger interests. And the South African unions are playing a role that should be familiar to those who know Israeli history.
Okay. I mean, I still have to question, though. I mean, they may. I mean, obviously, there's a certain win here for them in that they can actually protest and they got a wage increase, but it's still far below what they are asking for in terms of living wages. I mean, how can you illustrate the success a little bit more?
Yeah. First of all, if I were a right-wing commentator, which I'm not, I would tell you that they're actually much more highly paid than other workers in South Africa. That was what the companies were saying. And that they had no right to be asking for this additional wages when most people in South Africa live in terrible poverty. So this is kind of typical that workers who form unions and are successful tend to ask for more when they can get it. And that's what they've been doing. So they're in no sense poor in the South African context. They should be paid much more than they're being paid. But they're already being paid much more than typical South African workers. So they are quite successful.
Okay. And how does the South African situation translate to the rest of the world? I mean, what do industries, in what industries does it hold true for?
You mean where are unions successful?
Yes. If you want to call that successful.
Well, successful meaning that unions give workers the right to have a voice in the workplace, or give workers improved wages and working conditions. That's how you define success. And in that sense, wherever unions have been allowed to be free, and where, in societies where you allow trade unions to flourish, as they have in Western Europe or in North America, workers have won massive benefits and gains over the generations. So you look at the United States, without the trade union movement in America, they wouldn't be a middle class.
And how are unions changing these days? I mean, how are things different from back in the day where, I mean, a situation like in South Africa, as you argue, the situation is quite good. But compared certainly to America or other Western countries, it's not that great. How are unions changing, and what is their role today?
Unions are changing because the world around them is changing. So you have unions facing employers who are more hostile than employers have been for generations. Employers used to accept that there would be unions. American auto companies would accept the United Auto Workers and negotiate with them. Today, employers are more likely to think, well, we don't really need unions. We can smash them in the workplace. So you have a worldwide offensive against unions, which is weakening them in most countries.
So is this part of what's killing the middle class then, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. A middle class in a modern society is unimaginable without trade unions. The middle class came into existence because trade unions organized workers and won them better conditions. So without a trade union movement, you're going to see poverty spreading widely among working poor. That's what you'll have, no more middle class.
Okay. And what you say, I mean, what is the union's approach towards increased international privatization?
To increase privatization.
The international trend towards privatization. What's the union's situation there?
Unions are fighting against what they call the neoliberal consensus. Unions believe in defending the public sector, for example. Unions believe in defending collective bargaining and workers' rights in the workplace. And they're fighting a difficult fight, and they're fighting it all over the world, and the same issues are arising in country after country, including in Israel. So unions are facing very, very similar challenges with mixed degrees of success.
Okay, well, Eric Lee, trade unions, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As Scots get ready to vote in independence in the referendum next month, polls so far suggest a complete split from its historic union with Great Britain is unlikely. Here's more.
To be or not to be independent, that is the question the Scots will have to answer next month when they vote in a referendum that will decide their nation's future. Though it has been part of Great Britain since 1707, Scotland has had its own devolved parliament and control over areas like healthcare and education for 15 years. Now the Scottish National Party, led by Scotland's First Minister Alex Salmond, is fighting for a complete split from the historic union, meaning they'll be able to determine their own defence and foreign policy, as well as full tax and spending priorities.
The referendum is not about this party or this First Minister or even the wider Yes campaign. It's about putting Scotland's future into Scotland's hands.
But just a few weeks away from the referendum, voters aren't convinced Scotland can make it on its own. Most polls suggest that 45 to 50% of Scots would rather remain part of Britain. Around 30% say they will vote yes to independence, while the rest are undecided. The main issue, analysts say, is the economy. It remains unclear whether Scotland as a sovereign state would be able to keep the British pound as currency. And many doubt whether revenues from North Sea oil and gas will be enough to secure the future of an independent Scotland.
You should be thinking, what is the Scottish economy going to be like? What are the revenues for the government going to be like in 50 years' time, for example, or 100 years' time, when you and I are dead, but our children and our grandchildren are part of the Scottish economy? So that is the key question.
Salmond has accused his opponents of carrying out a campaign to scare off voters from claiming their sovereignty. Whether they choose to sever ties with Britain or not, Scots will have to remember that if they do end up going it alone, there will be no turning back.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth for a look at the international media in Media Watch. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Good. Okay, so where are you taking us today?
Well, we're going to start with The Telegraph. They ran this piece with these really intense photos of Athens. 10 years ago, I don't know if you remember, but 10 years ago, Athens hosted the Summer Olympics, and it was a huge, huge project.
Right.
It was a $12 billion project. Some say a double, some estimates say it's double what they had meant to invest in it. And now if you take a look at the scenery, the scenes, the stadiums, the swimming pools, they're empty, they're dirty, they're desolate, and incredibly, incredibly sad.
These are probably the pictures that people don't want you to see in terms of both the terrible squandering of money, but also for anyone else who's planning to host Olympics.
Yeah, it's really not good advertising,
right.
And actually there's been rumors that Olympic committees are having trouble finding new cities down the road in the 2020s. They're kind of scrounging and looking. There's cities you've never heard of who are in the top spots to get these beds. And this is a big reason, because 10 years later, partly because of mismanagement, partly because they overinvested in this, but you can't blame it all on the Olympics, of course. Greece got hit hard. They're in over $400 billion in debt since the global crash. They got hit very hard. They got nearly 30% unemployment. These are global issues. These are larger economic issues. But the Olympics, as a symbol first of sort of decadence of kind of spending money on a beautiful cultural athletic event, that then you look back on it. It's a really sad scene. It's very, very hard.
Is there an example of a place where it was successful, where these buildings were successfully used?
Well, it depends. One of the things that it depends on is what the governments want to portray. So, sometimes you get governments saying, "Oh yeah, no, we're using it. We're using it. It's great. Everything's fine. These buildings are going to good use now." Certainly, there are reports out of China that in Beijing, everything's fine and well. Is it fine and well? Let's see in another few years if the Telegraph has some photos from Beijing.
Well, we'll call you back when that's the case. Thanks, Daniel. That's the end of this Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial reports at I-24 News. I'm Benjamin Chong-Alfaris. Thanks for joining us, and join us again tomorrow.